He never forgot the girl who once believed in him. But when he saw her waiting tables, he knew he had to do something. Ryan Carter adjusted his cufflinks as he stepped into the upscale restaurant, the kind of place where millionaires sealed deals over expensive wine. He was here for a business meeting, another acquisition, another success. But as he scanned the room, his eyes froze on someone he never expected to see again. Standing by a corner table, balancing a tray with practiced ease, was her. Sophie Lawson. The girl who had once shared her lunch with him when he couldn't afford his own. The girl who had tutored him when no one else cared if he failed. The girl who had believed in him when the world saw him as nothing. And now, she was here. Waiting tables? Ryan's mind reeled. Back in high school, she had been the brightest student, full of dreams. He remembered how she had talked about becoming a lawyer, changing lives, making a difference. What had happened? He watched as an impatient customer snapped his fingers at her, barely looking up as he barked an order. Sophie simply nodded, flashing that same gentle smile. But there was something different about her now. Something tired. Something defeated. A sharp pang hit Ryan's chest. This wasn't right. As she turned toward the counter, he stood up abruptly, causing his business partner to raise an eyebrow. "Excuse me," Ryan muttered, weaving through the restaurant. "Sophie?" She paused, blinking in surprise as she met his gaze. Her breath hitched. "Ryan?" For a moment, time froze. The noise of the restaurant faded. It was just them. Two people who had once been inseparable, now standing worlds apart. "I can't believe it's you," she whispered, her voice a mix of shock and something else. Something close to embarrassment. Ryan smiled, but he couldn't ignore the way she clutched the tray in her hands, as if holding on to the only thing keeping her steady. "What are you doing here?" he asked gently. She exhaled, her grip tightening around the tray. "Working." A small, forced laugh. "I guess life didn't turn out the way I planned." Ryan's heart clenched. He could see it now, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she hesitated to meet his gaze, as if ashamed of where she was. But Sophie had nothing to be ashamed of. And Ryan? He had just made a decision. A decision that would change everything. Sophie forced a smile, but Ryan could see right through it. She always used to be so full of life, so unstoppable. Now she looked tired, worn down by something she wasn't saying. "I had no idea you were back in town," she said, shifting uncomfortably. "I wasn't, just flew in for a meeting," Ryan replied, his sharp eyes studying her. "But forget about me. What happened to you, Sophie? Last I remember, you were supposed to be running a courtroom by now." She let out a small laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, well, life doesn't always go as planned, does it?" She glanced around, as if checking if anyone needed her. "Listen, Ryan, it's great seeing you, but I really need to get back. Wait." His voice was firm, but gentle. "Let me take you to lunch after your shift." Sophie hesitated. She wanted to say no. He could see it, not because she didn't want to, but because something inside her was holding her back. But then a voice cut through their moment. "Sophie, less talking, more working." A gruff man in his 50s, dressed in a manager's uniform, stood near the kitchen door, arms crossed and glaring at her. Ryan's jaw clenched. Sophie gave a small nod and turned back to Ryan. "I should go." He watched as she hurried away, taking orders, balancing plates, smiling at rude customers who didn't even bother looking at her. Ryan felt something stir inside him. Back in high school, she had been the one pushing him forward. She had helped him when he had nothing, believed in him when no one else did. Now, she was struggling, and there was no way in hell he was going to just sit back and let it happen. His decision was made. Ryan stood, adjusting his suit jacket. His business partner raised an eyebrow. "Where are you going?" Ryan didn't even look back. To fix something that should have never been broken. Ryan didn't waste time. While Sophie continued her shift, he made a few calls. His name carried weight now, more than she probably realized. Within an hour, he had gathered all the information he needed. Sophie had started law school but never finished. Her mother had gotten sick, medical bills had piled up, and she had dropped out to take care of everything. She had been working ever since, barely making ends meet. She had sacrificed her dreams for her family. And now she was stuck in a job that didn't deserve her. Ryan sat back, gripping his phone tightly. He was furious, not at Sophie, but at the situation, at how someone so brilliant, so selfless, had been left struggling while people like him sat in corner offices making million-dollar deals. Not anymore. When Sophie's shift ended, she stepped out of the restaurant, sighing in exhaustion. She didn't see Ryan leaning against his sleek black car until he spoke. "Get in." She blinked in surprise. "Ryan, I told you I was taking you to lunch." He opened the passenger door. "No more excuses." Sophie hesitated but then sighed and slid into the car. As they drove, she glanced at him. "You didn't have to do this, you know." Ryan smirked. "I know." Minutes later, they arrived at one of the city's best rooftop restaurants. Sophie stiffened as they walked in, glancing down at her faded jeans and simple blouse. "Ryan, You look fine," he interrupted, leading her to a private table overlooking the skyline. She sat down, still uneasy. "So, why are you doing this?" Ryan leaned forward. "Because you deserve better, Sophie." His voice was serious now. "I know what you did for me back in high school. I haven't forgotten." She swallowed, looking away. "That was a long time ago." "But it mattered," he countered. "And now it's my turn." Sophie frowned. "Ryan, what are you—" He slid a folder across the table. "That's your scholarship, fully funded, no strings attached." Her breath caught in her throat. "What?" "I made some calls. Your old law school is willing to take you back." His eyes softened. "You just have to say yes." Sophie stared at the papers, her hands trembling. This was everything she had dreamed of, everything she had given up. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I can't let you do this." Ryan tilted his head. "Why not?" She let out a shaky breath. "Because I don't want to feel like a charity case." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Sophie, this isn't charity. This is payback." She blinked. "What?" Ryan smiled. "You saved my life once. Now I'm just returning the favor." Sophie's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in years, she saw a future again. And it was all because of him. Sophie wiped her eyes quickly, laughing through the tears. "Ryan, this is crazy. You don't owe me anything." Ryan leaned back, a confident smirk playing on his lips. "You're right. I don't owe you anything, but I want to do this." She looked down at the scholarship offer, her heart pounding. It felt surreal, like any second she'd wake up and realize this was all just a dream. Ryan's voice softened. "Sophie, you gave up your dreams for your family, but who's looking out for you?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know." "Well, now you do." Silence stretched between them. The restaurant buzzed around them, but in that moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Finally, Sophie exhaled shakily and looked him in the eye. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan grinned. "Positive." A long pause. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay." Ryan clapped his hands together. "Great! Then we celebrate." He waved down a waiter. "2 of your best steaks, please." Sophie chuckled, shaking her head. You haven't changed at all. He smirked. Neither of you. You're still the same girl who put everyone else first. As their meals arrived, Sophie relaxed, letting the reality of it sink in. She was going back to law school. She was getting a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this anymore. 2 years later, the courtroom was silent. Sophie stood tall, her voice strong and unwavering as she delivered her closing argument. The jury hung on every word. When she finished, she turned and met Ryan's gaze in the audience. He gave her a small nod of encouragement, his eyes filled with pride. Later that night, as they walked out of the courthouse together, Ryan slipped his hands into his pockets. So, Miss Future Attorney, dinner? Sophie laughed. You really like feeding me, don't you? Ryan winked. I like seeing you happy. She looked at him for a long moment, warmth filling her chest. Maybe, just maybe. This wasn't just a second chance at a career. Maybe it was a second chance at something even bigger. If you believe in the power of kindness and second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.